Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news are we'll be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu news. In the editorial page there is no news related to economy. In the open editorial page there is an article. This article discusses about how the various laws which are there to support the unemployment benefits for the organized and unorganized sector workers are not helpful. It begins by saying that during 2017 and 18 the unemployment rate in India was 6.1% and it reduced to almost 4.8% in 2019-20. Again, because of the pandemic, the unemployment increased, and now the quarterly unemployment figures for urban areas and rural areas show that the unemployment is almost 9.4% and 12.6%. And even between the urban areas and rural areas, the unemployment rate is more in the urban areas. So this can be a prelims question wherein they would ask the unemployment rate in rural area would be higher or unemployment rate in urban area is higher. Currently, the unemployment rate in urban areas are higher than the rural areas. But are there any unemployment benefits provided under law in India under the Labour Act? So, under the ESI Act, that is the Employee State Insurance Act, and under the Rajiv Gandhi Shramik Kalyan Yojana, the RGSKV scheme, it provides unemployment benefits to the people who get unemployment because of involuntary reasons. And what are the reasons? Whether it's because of retrenchment, that is the business is going through changes and the people have been removed from job not because of their mistake but because of the business decision, or because of closure of the business, or because of permanent disability or something, unemployment benefit would be given. And under this unemployment benefit, even the medical care would be taken care of during the period, and cost of the vocational training would also be covered. And whatever the contribution is made to the employment state insurance fund by the worker for a period of 2 years at the rate of 50% of the last drawn daily wages, the unemployment benefit would be given for the first year, and in the second year it would be 25% of the last drawn wages. And again in 2018 the government came with a new scheme called the ABVKV scheme, the Atal Bimit Vyakti Kalyan Yojana, wherein the unemployment persons are provided allowance for the rate of at the rate of 50% of their average daily earnings for a period of 90 days. So once they get unemployed, an allowance would be provided for 50% for a period of 90 days. And under the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947, for any firm which is employing 100 or more workers, it would pay a retrenchment compensation of 15 days per year calculated for the number of years. So here we can see under the Industrial Dispute Act, it is only the large companies and manufacturing firms that are covered, because the minimum criteria is the companies which employ 100 or more employees. Now recently in the last year the government has come up with the social security code, and there are no separate unemployment benefits provided under the social security code, and the justification given by the government with respect to that is that there is already coverage under the ESIA Act, so there is no separate coverage needed under the social security code. And under the ESIA Act, it would apply to all those companies which employs 10 or more workers. But under the Employment Provident Fund Act, the cover would be for the companies which allow 20 or more which employ 20 or more workers. So you need to note the difference here. Under the Employment State Insurance Act, it is 10 or more workers. Under the Provident Fund Act, it is 20 or more workers. And recently many states have amended the Industrial Disputes Act to increase the level of the minimum criteria for 300 workers or more. So From the 100 workers or more which was done by the central government, the state governments have increased it to minimum of 300 employed 300 workers or more. But on the other hand, they increased the rate of compensation from the 40 days to 90 days. But the author is asking the question that, are these schemes successful? We have discussed about how there is a scheme under the Atal Bimit Vyakti Kalyan Yojana, again under the Rajiv Gandhi Shramik Kalyan Yojana. Are these schemes successful? That's the question. So the author says these schemes are largely unsuccessful because, from if you take look at the data from 2007 to 2019 and 2020, for almost 13 years of data, under the Rajiv Gandhi, only 0.043 percentage of employees, the workers, availed the unemployment allowance under this scheme. So you can see how less the number is. And again, the unemployment expenditure out of the total cash expenditure of the Employee State Insurance Corporation, it just come to 0.25 percentage. So out of your expenditure, if some expenditure is just 0.25 percentage, it shows how less that expenditure is happening and how unsuccessful that scheme has been. And again, during the COVID-19, the government extended the Atal Yojana to all the organized sector employees working, and for the cash relief of, they got an average cash relief of 147 rupees, which is much lesser than the minimum wages provided under the MG Narega. So the author questions, if this is the plight of the workers in the organized sector, what about all those sectors who are working in the unorganized sector? People under the organized sector are not getting the unemployment allowance properly. What about the people in unorganized sector? And he says that providing direct benefits like under the MG Narega is better option because economics have proved that the amount that you incur on the relief to workers would be much lesser than what you incur for the corporates. So the author says we have to get reforms about the employment of people and how they are being fired and about the unemployment allowance that they have been provided, and we have to get a scheme for universal unemployment allowance so that the economy would not be affected, and the contribution for that should be happening by the employer, by the worker, and the government. And the same was suggested under the National Commission on Labor in 2002, that the contribution to the unemployment scheme has to be from the three parties: the employers, the workers, and the government. And when the retail inflation is rising, the consumer price index is rising, wholesale price index is rising, the employee provident fund has reduced the interest rate, and this would again affect the workers in the organized sector. So the author says that all the laws and welfare schemes, they have to provide relief to the marginal sectors so that the suffering of the workers would reduce. Here for us, the important data is about the social security scheme, the employment state insurance scheme, Atal Bimit Vyakti Kalyan Yojana, and Rajiv Gandhi Shramik Kalyan Yojana for prelims. And they can ask a question on the minimum number of persons employed, so you have to note that again. In text and context, there is explainer about the economic crisis that is happening in Sri Lanka. We have been reading news reports that the prices in Sri Lanka have been rising for essential commodities, and it is going through foreign exchange crisis. And what is happening in Sri Lanka? Because of the COVID pandemic in 2020, we saw how the migrant laborers from various states returned to their places, and similarly the migrant workers in different countries, they had to return back. For example, the people employed in the Arab nations, they had to come back, and states like Kerala got affected. Similarly, mainly the Sri Lankan laborers used to work in West Asian countries, and they had to return because of the COVID pandemic, and the business were closed in those. And on the other side, because of the pandemic, the garment manufacturing companies and the tea estates in Sri Lanka, they did not function because of the lockdowns. and many of the youth who were employed in these cities, they lost the jobs and they had to return to their rural areas. So Sri Lanka got affected in all fronts. They're losing foreign exchange because the workers came back, so the remittances reduced, and the tourism sector got affected because of pandemic, and the main export sectors like tea and garment manufacturing, it got affected. So Sri Lanka's economy got brutally hit from all sides. And adding to that crisis, various policies decision of the government, like the switching to the organic farming, would only mean that the crop produce became less. In organic farming, you go for chemical free farming, you go for biofertilizers, you go for crop manure, but when it is environmentally sustainable and environmentally healthy, the crop yield in organic farming would be lesser than the traditional chemical farming yields. So the crop yields got affected, because of which the supply of vegetables and fruits in the market reduced, and the prices of which increased because of the reduced supply. And government also put restrictions in last August in order to control the imports so that the foreign exchange could be saved. And because of these restrictions on import and sale, there have been instances of people hoarding stock so that they can make money in the future. And because of affecting of this export sector, the foreign exchange reserves of Sri Lanka fell to almost $1.6 billion, and Sri Lanka had to heavily repay the debts that it has taken from countries like China. But Sri Lanka kept up to its word and it repaid the foreign exchange debt. But because it repaid the foreign exchange debt, it didn't have enough money to import essential goods like food, fuel, and medicine. Because of which there is heavy fuel and food inflation in Sri Lanka happening. The power cuts are happening, and very recently we saw how Sri Lanka didn't conduct exams to people because there was paper shortage. How is it affecting the Sri Lankan rupee? The value of Sri Lankan rupee is falling against the dollar, and the consumer price inflation reached to almost 16.8 percentage, and the foreign reserves are just around $2.3 billion. And at the end of this year, Sri Lanka has to pay $7 billion of foreign debt. Imagine, on your foreign exchange is just 2.3 billion, $1 billion. You have to pay a debt of $7 billion, and in order to meet the imports of essential goods, you need another $22 billion. So Sri Lanka almost needs $30 billion, but it has just $2.3 billion. So you can see the crisis that Sri Lanka is going. So all this only means that people have to wait in long queues. There is shortage of food, cooking gas. The power cuts are happening. The people who are sick are not able to afford the medicines because of increasing. The children are not able to get milk. People are going hungry without eating. So in such a situation, what is Sri Lanka doing? Why is not the Sri Lankan government not going for the International Monetary Fund? We know that during 1991, when India went for LPG crisis, when we borrowed money from the IMF, IMF doesn't give money for free. It would put certain conditions that you have to open your economy. We were given the LPG conditions and we have to follow them in order to get the money. So Sri Lankan government was wary of going to the IMF for help because it was scared of the conditions that IMF would. Now it has no choice but to go to IMF for loan, and now government is in discussions for doing the same. At the same time, Sri Lankan government took support from countries like India and China. India had been helping Sri Lanka government by providing loans, currency swaps, and credit lines so that they can import the essential goods from India. Very recently in January, India extended Sri Lanka help of around $2.4 billion. You can see the foreign exchange reserves of Sri Lanka are $2.4 billion, and India has helped to the extent of $2.4 billion, of which $400 million was a currency swap, $500 million was a loan deferment. Loan deferment is when the repayment of the loan is deferred to a later period of time. Instead of paying now, they would be allowed to pay at a later point of time. And they have given credit so that they can import essential goods from India on credit basis. And very recently, yesterday and day before yesterday news, we saw how China is also trying to provide another $2.5 billion. It had already provided $2.5 billion and it is thinking to provide another $2.8 billion. Sri Lanka. But at the same time, there is some negative opinion about the assistance that is being given by India. Certain section of Sri Lankan people and in the certain section of media, they are looking it through the eyes of skepticism. They are thinking that India is doing this for strategic reasons. India is doing so that they can get access to the infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka, and they are accusing certain companies, Indian companies, of having backdoor entry to Sri Lankan market without going through the competitive bid process. In the world page, we just discussed how Sri Lanka turns to China for further $2.5 billion assist. We need not go through the details of it because we have already comprehensively covered in the previous. The business page, India comfortably placed to deal with any effect of war. RBI governor says that various high frequency indicators collected from the market through the statistics, they have shown that the economy is still performing well, and the current account deficit crisis that we are going to face, that is not like the 2013 taper tantrum crisis. We are placed at a better situation to meet it because our forex reserves have gone up by almost 270 billion in the recent times, and the inflation is also not very high. Because we have high forex reserves and the current account deficit is very low currently, we are at a better position to deal with the effect of the war. The employment provident fund rate, the interest rate is reduced to 8.1 percentage from the 8.5 percentage, in line with the other interest rate of various instruments like the Sukanya Samriddhi scheme, senior citizen savings scheme, the PPF public provident fund scheme, etc. Again, we need not read all this article, just need to go through the headlines and skip reading them. These are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.